The emergency lights bathed the cockpit in a pulsing crimson glow as Captain Derek Frost wrestled with the stuttering controls of the Hermes, a Class 4 interstellar transport vessel. His knuckles whitened against the manual override stick as the ship shuddered violently beneath him. "Status report," he barked at the ship's AI. "Primary engine failure imminent. Secondary systems compromised. Gravitational stabilizers at 18% capacity." The emotionless voice responded, "Emergency landing protocols initiated." Derek swore under his breath. 3 weeks of smooth sailing through Vega space, only to have the engines fail less than 2 days from their destination. He'd completed hundreds of diplomatic escort missions without incident. Of course, the one carrying Princess Kira Talani would be the one to go catastrophically wrong. As if summoned by his thoughts, the door to the cockpit slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Princess Kira Talani stood in the entryway, her violet eyes narrowed with suspicion. Despite the ship's violent trembling, she maintained perfect posture, her iridescent ceremonial robes catching the emergency lights in hypnotic patterns. "Captain, why have we dropped out of hyperspace?" Her voice carried the distinctive musical lilt of the Tanny people, but there was nothing melodious about her tone. "I have a crucial diplomatic appointment on Centauri Prime in 36 hours. Delays are unacceptable." Derek didn't bother looking at her. "We're experiencing engine failure, Your Highness. I'm attempting an emergency landing on Araxis." "Araxis?" Her voice rose an octave. "That backwater desert planet? Absolutely not. My father's summit cannot—" "With all due respect, Your Highness," Derek cut in, fighting to keep the ship steady as they entered Araxis's atmosphere. "It's either Araxis or floating dead in space. Unless you've suddenly developed the ability to breathe vacuum, I suggest you strap yourself in." The princess's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more as she reluctantly took the co-pilot seat, buckling the safety harness with practiced precision. Derek could practically feel the chill radiating from her direction. The awkward silence between them wasn't new. For 3 weeks, their interactions had been limited to terse exchanges and formal necessities. Princess Kira clearly viewed him as little more than a glorified chauffeur, and Derek had done nothing to change that perception. His mission was simple: transport the Tani diplomatic envoy safely to Centauri Prime for interspecies negotiations, then return to base. No complications, no attachments. Especially not with a Tani royal. The ship groaned as Derek guided it through the upper atmosphere, the external temperature readings climbing rapidly on the display. The princess flinched at a particularly violent shudder, but maintained her regal demeanor. "Impact in 45 seconds, the AI announced. "Brace for landing." Derek glanced at the princess. "Hold on tight, Your Highness. This won't be pretty." For the first time since she'd boarded his ship, he saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. Then, the moment passed, replaced by the haughty mask she typically wore. The Hermes slammed into the Araxian desert with a sickening crunch of metal. Derek's body strained against the harness as inertia tried to fling him forward. Warning klaxons blared throughout the ship, and acrid smoke began to fill the cockpit. When the ship finally stopped moving, Derek's ears rang with the sudden silence. He quickly unbuckled his harness and checked the princess. She appeared shaken, but unharmed, her knuckles white where she gripped the armrests. "Status report," Derek commanded the AI. "Primary and secondary engines offline. Hull integrity at 73%. Life support systems functional. Communications array damaged. Estimated repair time, 68 hours. 68 hours. The princess would miss her diplomatic appointment. Derek could already feel the headache forming behind his eyes. "Captain," Kira's voice was tight with restrained anger. "I require an immediate solution to this inconvenience." Derek checked the external sensors. "We're approximately 20 kilometers from a trading post. They should have the parts we need and communication equipment to contact your father's delegation." 20 kilometers? Through a desert? The princess looked aghast. That's barbaric. Your Highness, I understand this isn't ideal, but… Not ideal? She stood abruptly, her royal robes swirling around her. I am the daughter of Ambassador Talani, primary representative of the Tani Confederation. I am betrothed to Prefect Valen of the northern provinces. Every moment I am delayed risks the alliance between our peoples and the United Coalition. Derek bit back a sharp retort. The princess's self-importance grated on him. But he wasn't paid to have opinions. He was paid to complete the mission. I'll prepare the emergency supplies and protective gear, he said instead, rising from his seat. The Araxian desert is dangerous, especially for off-worlders. We'll need to be cautious. Kira's eyes flashed. I am not wearing bulky human protective gear. It's undignified. Your Highness, Derek said, struggling to maintain a neutral tone. Araxis has indigenous flora that can be extremely harmful to humanoid species. The bone cactus, in particular, has thorns that inject a neurotoxin. I am Tani, she interrupted, lifting her chin. Our physiology is superior to humans in every measurable way. What harms you will hardly affect me. Derek thought of the classified files he'd read about Tani biology. Their species was indeed more resilient than humans in many ways, with advanced cellular regeneration and enhanced immune systems. But toxins were toxins, and the Araxian bone cactus was notorious throughout the sector. The regulations are clear, Your Highness. All passengers must wear protective gear when traversing potentially hazardous environments. For a moment, they locked eyes in silent confrontation. Then Kira smiled, a cold, practiced expression that never reached her eyes. I'm not a passenger, Captain. I am a diplomatic envoy of the Tani Confederation, and I will not appear at the trading post looking like a terrified human colonist. She turned toward the door. Prepare whatever you need. We leave in 20 minutes. Before Derek could argue further, she was gone, leaving him alone with the blinking console lights and the faint smell of burned electronics. He closed his eyes briefly, counting backward from 10, an old combat meditation technique from his Special Forces days. When he opened them again, his expression was carefully neutral once more. Notify me when the princess returns to the main deck, he instructed the AI. Affirmative, Captain. As Derek moved through the ship gathering emergency supplies, he tried to focus on the practical aspects of their situation. The Hermes had landed in one piece. The life support systems were functional. If the trading post had the necessary parts, they could be back on course within 3 days. Still, something about this mission had felt wrong from the start. Maybe it was the hastily arranged diplomatic schedule, or the princess's unusual insistence on minimal security, or perhaps it was simply Derek's own paranoia, a souvenir from the Rielian War that he couldn't seem to shake. Either way, he had a job to do. Get the princess to the trading post, repair the ship, complete the mission. Then, he could return to the comfortable solitude of his quarters on Vega Station, where the only royal pain he had to deal with was the occasional hangover. 20 minutes later, Derek waited by the airlock, fully equipped in desert protective gear, lightweight but comprehensive, with a respirator mask, UV reflective outer layer, and emergency medical supplies attached to his utility belt. The princess, true to her word, arrived wearing only her ceremonial robes and a thin silken scarf to shield her face from the sun. Your Highness, Derek tried one last time, holding out a set of protective gloves. At least take these. The bone cactus. I have studied xenobotany extensively. Captain, she cut him off. I am well aware of the local flora. Now, shall we proceed? Or would you prefer to waste more time lecturing me on matters beyond your expertise? Derek clenched his jaw and returned the gloves to his pack. As you wish, Your Highness. The airlock cycled open, and a blast of hot, dry air rushed into the ship. The twin suns of Araxis blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, the color of burnished copper. The landscape before them was a seemingly endless expanse of red-orange sand, broken only by occasional rock formations and clusters of the infamous bone cacti. Pale, twisted plants with thorns that gleamed like polished ivory in the sunlight. "Keep at least 2 meters away from any bone cactus," Derek instructed as they began their trek. "The thorns can detach and become airborne in strong winds." Kira made a dismissive sound but said nothing more. They walked in silence for the first hour. The princess, surprisingly adept at navigating the difficult terrain despite her formal attire. Derek maintained a vigilant watch on their surroundings, scanning for signs of desert predators or the approaching sandstorms that Araxis was known for. "The Rielian war medal on your service record," Kira said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You were part of the assault on Kaldor Prime." Derek's steps faltered briefly. He hadn't expected her to have researched his military background. "Yes," he answered tersely. "You're the only survivor of your squadron," she continued. "The records are classified, but my father has access to Coalition military archives. You were demoted after the mission, despite being decorated for valor." Derek kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. "With respect, Your Highness, my military service isn't relevant to our current situation." "On the contrary," Kira said, her voice taking on an analytical quality. "I find it explains much about your behavior, your excessive caution, your rigid adherence to protocol, your reluctance to engage in conversation." She glanced at him sidelong. "You're afraid of failure, of losing someone else under your command." Derek stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Princess Talani, I'm not here to be psychoanalyzed. I'm here to ensure you reach your destination safely. That's all." A hint of a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Such defensiveness, Captain. Have I touched a nerve?" Before Derek could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept across the desert. He instinctively raised an arm to shield his mask's viewplate from the stinging sand. "We should keep moving," he said, eager to change the subject. "There's a ridge ahead that should provide some shelter if the wind picks up further." Kira nodded, adjusting her silk scarf over her nose and mouth. As she turned to continue walking, another powerful gust rocked them both. Derek steadied himself easily, but the princess, lighter and unprepared, stumbled sideways, directly toward a cluster of bone cacti. "Princess!" Derek lunged forward, but he was too late. Kira's right arm brushed against the plant, and several ivory thorns detached, embedding themselves in her skin. She cried out in pain and surprise, jerking away from the cactus only to lose her balance completely. As she fell, more thorns pierced the thin fabric of her robes. Derek reached her in seconds, carefully pulling her away from the deadly plant. Already, angry red welts were forming around the embedded thorns, and her violet eyes had widened with the first stirrings of fear. "Don't move," Derek instructed, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. He quickly examined the wounds. At least 7 thorns had penetrated her skin, 3 deep enough to be concerning. "It stings," she said, her imperious tone faltering as the neurotoxin began to take effect. "Like fire beneath my skin." "I need to remove the thorns and get you back to the ship," Derek said, already reaching for the medical kit on his belt. "The Hermes has basic medical facilities that can synthesize an antivenin." "No," Kira shook her head stubbornly, though her movements were becoming sluggish. "We must reach the trading post, the diplomatic meeting." "Your Highness, the toxin will spread quickly without treatment. It affects the nervous system first, then the respiratory." "I am Tani," she insisted, though her voice was weakening. "Our physiology is superior." Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into Derek's arms, unconscious. Derek swore under his breath. The princess's stubborn refusal to wear protective gear had now endangered both their lives. He couldn't leave her to fetch help, and carrying her all the way to the trading post was out of the question with a sandstorm potentially brewing. With practiced efficiency, Derek administered a general antitoxin from his medical kit, a stopgap measure at best, and carefully lifted the princess into his arms. Her weight was surprisingly light against his chest, her breathing already becoming shallow and rapid. "Hold on, Your Highness," he murmured, turning back toward the ship. "Just hold on." The return journey to the Hermes felt interminable, each step hampered by the increasingly hostile wind and the precious burden in his arms. By the time the ship came into view, a fine sheen of sweat covered Derek's face beneath his respirator, and the princess's skin had taken on an alarming ashen hue. "Emergency Medical Protocol Alpha," Derek commanded as soon as the airlock sealed behind them. "Prepare the medbay for toxin extraction and synthesis." "Acknowledged, Captain," the AI responded. "Medbay prepared. Vital signs indicate severe neurotoxin exposure. Recommend immediate treatment." Derek carried Kira to the small medical bay, gently laying her on the examination table. Her breathing had become erratic, and her skin burned with fever. Working quickly, he removed the remaining thorns with a pair of sterile forceps, placing them in a sample container for the medical AI to analyze. "Begin toxin analysis," he instructed, attaching monitoring sensors to Kira's temples and wrists. "Prioritize antivenin synthesis." "Analysis initiated," the AI confirmed. "Warning: Tani Physiology Database Limited. Full antivenin synthesis requires additional xenobiological parameters." Derek stared at the readout in dismay. Of course, the Hermes wouldn't have complete data on Tani biology. Their species was notoriously secretive about their medical information, considering it a potential strategic weakness to share such details with other races. "Use human parameters as baseline and adjust for known Tani variances," he decided. "Administer supportive care in the meantime, oxygen supplement and fever reduction." As the AI complied with his instructions, Derek carefully removed the princess's outer robes, now torn and contaminated with toxin. Beneath them, she wore a simple shift of silvery material that seemed to shimmer with her every labored breath. For the first time, Derek noticed the intricate patterns of bioluminescent markings on her exposed arms and shoulders, delicate swirls of pale blue light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. He'd heard about this Tani trait, but had never seen it personally. The classified files mentioned that the markings typically remained invisible, only becoming apparent during periods of extreme stress or emotion. "Preliminary analysis complete," the AI announced. "Araxian bone cactus neurotoxin identified. Antivenin synthesis in progress. Estimated completion time: 4 hours, 17 minutes. 4 hours. Derek checked Kira's vital signs on the monitor. Her pulse was rapid, her temperature dangerously elevated. Without the proper antivenin, he wasn't certain she would last that long. "Is there anything we can do to speed up the process?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Negative, Captain. The molecular complexity of the toxin requires precise synthesis. Acceleration would compromise efficacy." Derek ran a hand through his hair in frustration. There had to be something more he could do. "What about the trading post?" he mused aloud. "They must deal with thorn injuries regularly." "Accessing Araxis settlement database," the AI responded. "Affirmative. Trading Post Epsilon maintains emergency medical supplies, including bone cactus antivenin. Distance: 18 kilometers from current position." Derek glanced at the medical readout again, making a quick calculation. "Monitor the princess and continue antivenin synthesis. If her condition deteriorates, place her in stasis. I'm going to the trading post." "Captain, safety protocols advise against solo excursions in hostile environments," the AI cautioned. "Override safety protocol," Derek replied grimly. "Authorization Frost Echo 97. "Override accepted. Please exercise caution, Captain." Derek placed a cool compress on Kira's forehead, checking once more that the medical systems were properly monitoring her condition. For a moment, he stood looking down at her, The haughty princess was gone, replaced by a vulnerable young woman fighting for her life, because she had refused his advice. "I'll be back with the antivenin," he promised quietly, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Just stay alive, Your Highness." With that, he gathered fresh emergency supplies, checked his weapon, and headed back into the Araxian desert. The winds had intensified during Derek's return to the ship, and now the horizon was darkening with the unmistakable wall of an approaching sandstorm. He estimated he had perhaps 2 hours before it hit, barely enough time to reach the trading post if he maintained a punishing pace. Years of military training took over as Derek pushed his body to its limits. His mind focused solely on the objective: reach the trading post, acquire the antivenin, return to the ship. The lives of his teammates, no, the princess, depended on it. The slip in his thoughts disturbed him. For a moment, he had been back on Caldor Prime, racing against time to save his squad. But they were long dead, their bodies left behind on that blood-soaked moon because he had failed them. He would not fail again. When Trading Post Epsilon finally came into view, the sandstorm was less than 30 minutes away. The settlement was a hodgepodge of prefabricated structures and repurposed shipping containers, surrounded by a force field designed to repel the worst of the desert storms. A motley collection of ground vehicles and small spacecraft were docked at various points around the perimeter. Derek approached the main entrance, where a bored-looking Solarian security officer manned a checkpoint. "Identification and purpose," the officer droned, barely looking up from his console. "Captain Derek Frost, United Coalition Navy," Derek replied, transmitting his credentials from his wrist device. "Emergency situation. I need immediate access to your medical facilities." The Solarian's large eyes blinked rapidly as he reviewed the information. "Coalition military. Unusual. We don't get many of your kind here." "It's urgent," Derek pressed. "I have a passenger suffering from bone cactus envenomation." That got the officer's attention. "Serious condition." "Critical. Female Tani. Approximately 3 hours post-exposure. 7 puncture wounds. 3 deep tissue." The Solarian whistled through his teeth. "Tani, you say? Even more unusual." He tapped something into his console. "Medical facility is in the central plaza, building marked with the universal aid symbol. Dr. Varen is on duty. Tell him Nex sent you." "Thank you," Derek said, already moving past the checkpoint. "Captain," the Solarian called after him, "that sandstorm's going to lock us down for at least 12 hours. You'd better plan to stay." Derek nodded grimly. 12 hours away from the ship, away from Kira. He could only hope the medical AI could keep her stable until his return. The trading post's central plaza was a cramped but lively space, filled with vendors selling everything from ship parts to exotic foodstuffs. Derek pushed his way through the crowd, eyes fixed on the glowing medical symbol above a squat, white building. Inside, the facility was surprisingly modern, with clean lines and advanced equipment that seemed out of place in the frontier settlement. A tall, spindly alien with pale green skin looked up from a diagnostic console as Derek entered. "Dr. Varen?" Derek asked. "Nex sent me. I need bone cactus antivenin immediately. Female Tani. Critical condition." The doctor's elongated fingers paused over the console. "Tani? That's problematic. Their biology doesn't respond well to our standard antivenin formulations." Derek's heart sank. "There must be something you can do. She won't survive without treatment." Dr. Varen studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I can synthesize a modified version, but I'll need a genetic sample from the patient to calibrate it properly." "I have thorn samples with her tissue and blood," Derek said, producing the sealed container from his pack. The doctor took it, examining the contents with clinical interest. "This will help, but it's not ideal. The antivenin will be less effective than a properly calibrated dose." He moved to a sophisticated-looking machine in the corner of the room. "It will take approximately 40 minutes to synthesize." I don't have 40 minutes, Derek said, glancing at the viewing port where the edge of the sandstorm was now visible. The storm is about to hit, and my ship is 18 kilometers out. Dr. Varen's expression remained impassive. Then your tawny friend is in serious trouble. Captain, the synthesis cannot be rushed. Derek paced the small room, mind racing. What about a temporary measure? Something to slow the toxin's progression until I can get back with the proper antivenin. The doctor considered this. There is a palliative compound that can temporarily bind to neural receptors, blocking the toxin's effects. It won't cure her, but it might buy you a few more hours. He moved to a storage unit and retrieved a small vial of pale blue liquid. Administer this intravenously. 1 dose only. Too much will cause cardiac arrest in tawny physiology. Derek accepted the vial carefully. And the antivenin? I'll begin synthesis immediately. Return when the storm passes, and it will be waiting for you. Thank you, Doctor. Derek turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Is there any shelter closer to my ship than the trading post? Somewhere I could wait out the storm? Dr. Varen's elongated fingers danced over a console, pulling up a topographical map of the surrounding desert. There's an abandoned mining outpost approximately 5 kilometers from your landing coordinates. Basic structure, no amenities, but it should withstand the storm. Derek memorized the location. That will have to do. I'll return as soon as the storm passes. With the palliative compound secured in his medical kit, Derek rushed back to the trading post entrance. The sandstorm had arrived in full force, howling against the settlement's force field in a fury of red-orange particles. You're not thinking of going out in that, are you? Nex asked, incredulously, as Derek approached the checkpoint. No choice, Derek replied, checking the seal on his respirator. My passenger won't survive if I wait. The Solarian shook his head. Your funeral. Coalition. Force field reduction in Airlock 3 will give you exit access. Don't expect us to come looking for your desiccated corpse. Derek nodded grimly and headed for the designated airlock. As the outer door slid open, the full fury of the Araxian sandstorm hit him like a physical blow. Visibility was reduced to mere meters, and the howling wind threatened to knock him off his feet. Orientation would be nearly impossible under these conditions. Derek activated the locator beacon on his wrist device, syncing it to the Hermes' signal. A faint, directional indicator appeared on his heads-up display, his only guide through the maelstrom. Taking a deep breath, Derek stepped into the storm. The journey back was a nightmare of blinding sand, screaming wind, and utter disorientation. Several times, Derek was forced to his knees by particularly violent gusts, and once he nearly walked directly into a bone cactus cluster, saved only by the last-minute gleam of ivory thorns in his flashlight beam. When the readout indicated he was nearing the abandoned mining outpost, Derek could barely stand. His protective gear was abraded in multiple places, and fine sand had infiltrated his respirator, making each breath a painful rasp. The outpost itself was little more than a reinforced bunker, half buried in the sand, its entrance nearly invisible in the storm. Derek had to dig through several feet of accumulated sand before he could access the manual door controls. The interior was dark and stale, but blessedly still after the chaos outside. Derek secured the door and allowed himself a moment to catch his breath before activating his emergency lamp. The space was small and utilitarian, a single room with basic survival equipment left behind by the mining operation. A rudimentary communication console stood against one wall, long defunct, judging by the dust covering it. Derek checked his wrist device. The Hermes was still 13 kilometers away, an impossible distance in the current conditions. He would have to wait out the worst of the storm here, then make a dash for the ship as soon as conditions improved. In the meantime, he needed to establish contact with the Hermes to check on Kira's condition. The outpost's communication equipment was useless, but Derek's military-grade wrist device had enhanced capabilities. He activated the emergency channel, directing it to the ship's AI. Hermes, this is Captain Frost. Do you copy? Static was his only answer. The storm was interfering with the signal. Derek adjusted the frequency and tried again. Hermes, this is Frost. Emergency channel Alpha. Respond. More static. Then a broken transmission. Tane. Patient condition. Deteriorating. Hallucinations have... Repeat transmission, Hermes, Derek urged. Patient status unclear. Patient experiencing severe hallucinations. Attempting to leave medbay. Restraints. Necessary. The transmission cut out completely. Derek swore. Hallucinations were a known symptom of advanced bone cactus envenomation. If Kira was trying to leave the medbay in her condition, she could further injure herself or damage the ship's medical equipment. He needed to get back to the Hermes immediately, storm or no storm. Derek checked the external sensors on his suit. The sandstorm's intensity had peaked and was beginning to wane, though it would still be dangerous to venture out. But danger to himself was preferable to the certainty of Kira's death if he delayed. With grim determination, he readied his equipment, administered a stimulant from his medical kit, and prepared to face the storm once more. The 13-kilometer journey to the Hermes was a blur of pain and determination for Derek. The storm had indeed lessened, but remained dangerous, the wind-driven sand finding every weakness in his protective gear. By the time the ship's outline became visible through the haze, his exposed skin was raw and bleeding, and he had long since emptied his water supply. Emergency access, he gasped as he reached the airlock, leaning heavily against the hull. Authorization, Frost Echo 97. The airlock cycled open with agonizing slowness, and Derek stumbled inside, falling to his knees as the outer door sealed behind him. Captain Frost, medical attention recommended, the AI stated coolly. Later, Derek rasped, struggling to his feet. Princess status? Princess Talani's condition has stabilized, but remains critical. Hallucinations have subsided following administration of a sedative. Neurotoxin has spread to 65% of neural pathways. Estimated time to complete system failure, 3 hours, 22 minutes. Derek pulled off his damaged respirator, wincing as the movement aggravated his sand-burned skin. Prepare for administration of palliative compound. Caution, Captain. Unknown compound may interact negatively with current medications. Noted, override medical protocol. Authorization Frost Echo 97. The AI fell silent as Derek made his way to the medbay, each step an effort of will. When he entered, the sight that greeted him made his breath catch. Kira lay on the examination table, secured by medical restraints. Her skin had taken on a ghostly pallor that contrasted sharply with the now brilliant blue luminescence of her markings. The patterns seemed to have spread, covering not just her arms, but extending across her collarbones and up her neck in delicate, swirling designs. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, staring at something only she could see. Her lips moved continuously, forming words in the tawny language that Derek couldn't understand. Your Highness, he said softly, approaching the table. Kira's gaze snapped to him, sudden recognition flaring in her violet eyes. Captain, she whispered, her voice raw. You came back. Of course I did, Derek replied, preparing the palliative compound for injection. I told you I would. They said you abandoned me, she murmured. Left me to die like your squadron on Caldor Prime. Derek's hands stilled. The toxin-induced hallucinations must have tapped into the information she knew about his past. That's not what happened on Caldor, he said quietly. And I would never abandon you, Your Highness. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed brighter. I saw them die, Captain. In my dreams, your men, screaming as the Rielian forces overwhelmed your position. You, running from the slaughter, leaving them behind. Derek forced himself to continue preparing the injection, though her words cut deeper than the sand had cut his skin. "That's not what happened," he repeated, more firmly this time. "Then what did happen, Captain?" Kira's voice was suddenly clearer, her gaze more focused. "Why do you carry such guilt?" Derek looked down at her, surprised by the lucidity in her eyes, despite her condition. For a moment, he considered deflecting again, maintaining the professional distance he'd cultivated throughout their journey. Instead, he found himself speaking the truth he had never shared with anyone outside the military tribunal. "I didn't abandon them," he said, his voice low. "I was captured, tortured for information by Raelian interrogators. When I wouldn't break, they forced me to watch as they executed my team, one by one." His hands trembled slightly as he prepared her arm for the injection. "I was rescued 3 days later by a coalition extraction team. The official report said I abandoned my post because the truth was deemed too damaging to coalition morale. My commanding officer gave me a choice: accept the demotion and the lie, or face a court-martial for insubordination." Kira was silent for a long moment, her luminescent markings pulsing with her heartbeat. "You chose to bear the shame rather than challenge the system you served," she said finally. "I understand that choice all too well, Captain." Before Derek could ask what she meant, a violent seizure racked her body, her back arching against the restraints as the toxin attacked her nervous system. Derek quickly administered the palliative compound, watching anxiously as the medication took effect. Gradually, Kira's body relaxed, her breathing evening out once more. The luminescence of her markings dimmed slightly, returning to a steady, gentle pulse. "That should help until the storm passes," Derek told her, checking her vital signs. "There's a proper antivenin waiting for us at the trading post." "You risked your life," Kira murmured, her eyes growing heavy as the compound's sedative effect took hold. "For me, despite how I treated you." "It's my job, Your Highness." "No," she shook her head weakly. "It's more than that. You're more than that. Derek Frost." Her use of his name, without his rank, caught him off guard. In the 3 weeks they'd traveled together, she had never once addressed him so informally. "Rest now," he said gently. "We'll talk when you're recovered." Kira's eyes drifted closed, but her fingers caught his hand with surprising strength. "Stay," she whispered. "The dreams, they're terrible." Derek hesitated only briefly before pulling a chair to her bedside. "I'll stay," he promised, settling beside her. No more bad dreams. As Kira slipped into a more peaceful sleep, Derek found himself studying her face, truly seeing it for the first time. Without the haughty expression she typically wore, she looked younger, more vulnerable. The luminescent markings gave her an otherworldly beauty, their soft blue glow casting gentle shadows across her features. What had she meant about understanding his choice to bear shame rather than challenge the system? What burdens did this tawny princess carry beneath her imperious exterior? For the first time since their journey began, Derek found himself genuinely curious about the woman he had been assigned to transport, not as a diplomatic package to be delivered, but as a person with her own story. As the hours passed and the storm gradually subsided outside, Derek maintained his vigil at Kira's bedside. The palliative compound kept the worst of the toxin's effects at bay, but her condition was clearly deteriorating. The luminescent markings began to fade, and her breathing grew shallow once more. When the ship's sensors finally indicated the storm had passed, Derek wasted no time. He stabilized Kira as best he could for transport, then carefully lifted her into his arms. "Hang on, princess," he murmured as he carried her through the ship. Just a little longer. The journey to Trading Post Epsilon was mercifully uneventful. The post-storm desert was eerily calm, the air crystal clear, as if to compensate for the previous chaos. Kira remained unconscious in Derek's arms, her body burning with fever despite the medical interventions. Dr. Varon was waiting when they arrived, his clinical gaze assessing Kira's condition with professional detachment. "You're just in time, Captain," he said, gesturing to an examination table. "Her life signs are failing." Derek gently laid Kira on the table, stepping back to allow the doctor access. "The antivenin?" "Ready," Dr. Varon confirmed, producing a vial of pearlescent liquid. "Though I must warn you, her condition has progressed significantly. There may be unexpected complications." "What kind of complications?" Derek asked sharply. The doctor's elongated fingers worked with practiced precision as he prepared the injection. Bone cactus toxin affects neural pathways, including those governing emotional regulation and memory. Some patients experience personality changes, emotional lability, or unusual cognitive effects during recovery. But she'll recover? Physically, yes, assuming the antivenin works as intended. Dr. Varon administered the injection with smooth efficiency. The psychological effects are harder to predict, especially with tawny physiology. Derek watched anxiously as the antivenin entered Kira's system. For several long moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then, suddenly, her luminescent markings flared with blinding intensity, their glow visible even through the fabric of her clothing. "What's happening?" Derek demanded, moving closer despite Dr. Varon's warning gesture. "A reaction to the antivenin," the doctor replied, quickly adjusting something on his medical scanner. "It's breaking down the toxin, but the process is more aggressive than anticipated." Kira's body convulsed once, then went completely still. For a heart-stopping moment, Derek thought they had lost her. Then her chest rose with a deep, shuddering breath, and her eyes flew open, glowing with the same intense blue light as her markings. "Derek," she whispered, her voice strangely resonant. Her hand reached for him, and without thinking, he took it in his own. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of energy surged between them. Derek gasped as images flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own. A crystal palace on a distant world, the weight of ceremonial robes, a father's stern disapproval, crushing loneliness despite constant company, and beneath it all, a desperate yearning for something real, something true. Just as suddenly, the connection broke. Kira's eyes returned to their normal violet hue, though they remained wide with shock. What just happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Varon was staring at them both, his scientific curiosity clearly piqued. "Fascinating. A neural empathic response. Extremely rare, even among Tani." "Explain," Derek demanded, still reeling from the intensity of the experience. "The bone cactus toxin appears to have temporarily altered the princess's natural telepathic abilities. All Tani possess them to some degree, though they rarely manifest so dramatically." The doctor continued scanning Kira, his expression thoughtful. "The antivenin accelerated the process, creating a momentary link between your consciousnesses." Kira was looking at Derek with new awareness, her expression a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "I felt your mind," she said softly. "Your memories. Caldor Prime. It was even worse than you described." Derek swallowed hard. The connection had gone both ways. Then, "Your Highness, I—" "No more titles," she interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "Not between us. Not after that." Dr. Varon cleared his throat. "The princess will need to remain under observation for at least 6 hours, while the antivenin completes its work. Captain, I suggest you use that time to rest and recover from your own injuries." Derek nodded, suddenly aware of his exhaustion and the painful sandburns covering much of his exposed skin. "I'll arrange for accommodations at the trading post." "No," Kira said, her hand tightening around his. "Stay with me, please." Her luminescent markings pulsed with her words, as if emphasizing her sincerity. Dr. Varon gave Derek a knowing look. "I'll prepare a cot in the observation room. The princess should not be left alone during this stage of recovery in any case." As the doctor moved away to make the arrangements, Derek found himself still holding Kira's hand, unable or unwilling to break the contact. "I saw your memories too," he said quietly. "Your father, the arranged marriage to Prefect Valen, the diplomatic pressures." Kira's gaze dropped. "Then you understand what I meant about bearing shame rather than challenging the system." "You never wanted this diplomatic mission." "No," she admitted. "But it was my duty, just as following orders was yours." She looked up at him again, something vulnerable in her expression. "We're not so different, you and I, both trapped by expectations, bound by duties we never chose." The simple truth of her words resonated deeply with Derek. For 3 weeks, he had seen only the haughty princess, never bothering to look beyond the surface to the person beneath. Now, having literally seen into her mind, he understood the weight she carried, the loneliness of a royal life, the constant performance, the sacrifice of personal desires for political necessity. "I misjudged you," he said finally. A small smile touched her lips. "As I misjudged you, Captain." She paused, then corrected herself. "Derek." The way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. Before he could respond, Dr. Varon returned. "The observation room is prepared," he announced. "I've synthesized a topical treatment for your sandburns. Captain, I suggest you apply it before resting." Derek nodded his thanks, reluctantly releasing Kira's hand. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," he told her. "I know," she replied simply. "You came back through a sandstorm for me. I won't forget that." As Derek followed Dr. Varon to the observation room, he found himself grappling with unfamiliar emotions. The mental connection had changed something between them, breaking down barriers that 3 weeks of formal interaction had reinforced. He had seen Kira, truly seen her, and she had seen him, with all his guilt and regret and determination laid bare. Whatever happened next, their relationship could never return to what it had been before. 6 hours later, Dr. Varon pronounced Kira fully recovered, though he cautioned that she might experience lingering effects from the toxin for several days. The neural empathic connection should fade as the last traces of toxin leave your system, he explained as they prepared to depart. Though in rare cases, a permanent bond may form between affected individuals. Kira and Derek exchanged a glance but said nothing. The intensity of their initial connection had indeed diminished, but something remained, a subtle awareness of each other's presence, a faint echo of emotions that weren't their own. "Thank you for your assistance, Doctor," Kira said formally. Once again the diplomatic princess, despite her simple attire. "The Tani Confederation will ensure your facility receives generous compensation." Dr. Varon inclined his head. "It was my professional privilege, Your Highness. Safe travels to you both." As they left the medical facility, Derek noticed Kira walking closer to him than protocol would dictate, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they navigated the crowded plaza. Neither commented on the proximity. The trading post mechanics had provided the parts needed to repair the Hermes, and by the following morning, the ship was once again space-worthy. As they prepared for departure, Derek found himself reluctant to resume their journey, and the formal relationship it represented. "Course set for Centauri Prime," he announced as they entered the cockpit. "Estimated arrival in 38 hours. Kira took the co-pilot seat without being asked, her luminescent markings faintly visible beneath the sleeves of her fresh attire. "We'll miss the scheduled diplomatic meeting," she observed. "Yes," Derek agreed. "I've transmitted our situation to both Tani Confederation and Coalition authorities. Your father's delegation has postponed the formal negotiations until our arrival." Kira was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing abstract patterns on the armrest. "My father will be displeased by the delay. as will Prefect Valen's family. Something in her tone made Derek glance at her. You're not eager to see your betrothed. It wasn't a question, but Kira answered anyway. The arrangement is politically advantageous. Valen's family controls the northern provinces, which contain the richest deposits of crystalline ore in tiny space. My father has spent years negotiating the match. That doesn't answer my question, Derek said gently. Kira met his gaze, a sad smile touching her lips. No, I am not eager to see my betrothed, but what I want has never been relevant to matters of state. The ship rose smoothly from the Araxian surface, climbing toward the upper atmosphere, where they could engage the hyperdrive. Derek focused on the controls, giving Kira a moment of privacy as she stared out at the diminishing landscape below. It's strange, she said after a while. I never appreciated how beautiful Araxis is from above. All that chaos and danger transformed into something serene from a different perspective. Derek understood she wasn't just talking about the planet. Perspectives can change quickly, he agreed. Sometimes all it takes is seeing through someone else's eyes. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed briefly, a reaction to his words. The neural empathic connection. Dr. Varen said it would fade completely within days. Yes. I'm not sure I want it to, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek's hands stilled on the controls. The ship had reached the optimal altitude for hyperdrive engagement, hanging in the upper atmosphere, as if waiting for his decision. Kira, he began, unsure what he wanted to say. She turned to him, her expression suddenly alarmed. Derek, I feel strange. Before he could respond, Kira doubled over in pain, a cry escaping her lips. The luminescent markings on her skin flared brilliantly, spreading visibly across her body until she seemed to glow from within. Hermes! Medical emergency! Derek shouted, unbuckling his harness to reach her. What's happening? Kira looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock and something else, wonder. Derek, she gasped. I can feel life inside me. What? She pressed a hand to her abdomen, the blue glow concentrating beneath her fingers. A child, she whispered. Impossible. But I can feel it. Growing. Changing. Derek stared at her in disbelief. That's not possible. We didn't. Not in the human way, Kira said, her voice steadying as the initial pain subsided. The neural empathic connection. The bone cactus toxin must have altered my biology more significantly than Dr. Varen realized. The antivenin accelerated the process. Kira looked down at her glowing abdomen in amazement. Tani reproduction can occur through deep telepathic bonding, but it's rare, almost mythical. It requires a perfect neurological compatibility that few ever find. Derek sank back into his seat, struggling to process her words. You're saying that when our minds connected, we created life, Kira finished, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. A child of two species, conceived through thought rather than physical union. The implications crashed over Derek like a wave. A child. His child. With the Tani princess betrothed to another man. The diplomatic ramifications alone were staggering, not to mention the personal ones. What do we do? He asked, his military training providing no protocol for the situation. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed with surprising serenity. We continue to Centauri Prime, she said with newfound determination. And I speak truth to my father and the coalition representatives. The truth could spark an interspecies incident, Derek warned. Your betrothal to Prefect Valen will be voided by Tani law once my condition is known. Kira interrupted. Our laws are clear. A child conceived through neural empathic bonding is considered sacred. The parents bound by something deeper than political arrangement. Derek ran a hand through his hair, trying to think through all the potential consequences. Your father won't simply accept this, nor will Valen's family, Or my superiors, for that matter. No, Kira agreed, her hand still pressed to her abdomen. They won't. Which is why we must be prepared to fight for what has happened between us. What has happened between us? Derek repeated slowly. Kira, we barely know each other. 3 weeks of formal interaction, one mind link during a medical emergency, and now, this. Kira reached across the space between them, taking his hand. Once again. The moment of contact brought a flash of emotional transference, not as intense as before, but clear enough to feel her certainty, her lack of regret. I know you, Derek Frost, she said softly. I've seen your soul. You've seen mine. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from years of polite conversation or shared experiences. It comes from true seeing. Derek felt the truth of her words resonating through their connection. He had seen her strength, her sense of duty, her hidden rebellion against the constraints of her position. And she had seen him. Not the failure that his record proclaimed, but the man who had endured torture rather than betray his comrades, who had carried a princess through a sandstorm to save her life. This won't be easy, he said finally, squeezing her hand gently. A smile bloomed across Kira's face, transforming her features with genuine happiness. The worthwhile things rarely are, Captain. With a decisive motion, Derek engaged the hyperdrive. The stars elongated around them as the Hermes leapt into faster-than-light travel, carrying them toward an uncertain future. Together. The journey to Centauri Prime passed in a blur of medical scans, urgent communications, and intense conversations. The ship's AI confirmed what Kira had already known. She was indeed pregnant, the embryo developing at an accelerated rate due to the unique circumstances of conception. According to the limited data available, the child would reach full term in approximately 3 standard months, rather than the typical 9 for humans or 12 for Tani. By the time they arrived at Centauri Prime, Kira's condition was unmistakable. Her luminescent markings remained continuously visible, concentrated around her abdomen, where a slight swell had already become apparent. The diplomatic quarters were in an uproar as news of the princess's unexpected condition spread through official channels. Ambassador Talani, Kira's father, awaited them at the spaceport. His tall, imposing figure flanked by Tani guards and coalition military personnel. His expression was thunderous as Kira and Derek descended the Hermes' ramp together. Daughter! Ambassador Talani's voice was glacial, despite the formal embrace he offered. You have created quite the diplomatic situation. Father, Kira replied, her chin lifted with newfound confidence. Captain Frost and I request an immediate audience with both the Tani delegation and coalition representatives. The ambassador's gaze shifted to Derek, assessing the human with open disdain. Captain Frost will be detained for questioning regarding his conduct during this mission. No, Kira said firmly, her luminescent markings flaring with her emotion. He will remain with me, as is his right under Tani law as the father of my child. A murmur ran through the assembled officials. Ambassador Talani's expression darkened further, but he was too skilled a diplomat to create a scene at the spaceport. Very well, he conceded coldly. The council chamber has been prepared for this unexpected development. The coalition representatives await our arrival, as does Prefect Valen's family. Derek fell into step beside Kira as they followed her father toward the waiting transport. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Kira's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The Centauri Prime Council chamber was an imposing space, its high ceiling adorned with crystalline chandeliers that cast prismatic light across the gathered dignitaries. The Tani delegation occupied one side of the circular chamber, their formal robes and luminescent facial markings identifying their various ranks and houses. Opposite them sat the coalition representatives, their military uniforms a stark contrast to the flowing attire of the Tani. In the center of the chamber, a raised platform held 3 ornate chairs, one for Ambassador Talani, one for General Harrington of the Coalition, and one for Prefect Vallon, whose cold eyes tracked Kira's movements as she entered with Derek. This council is convened to address the unexpected development in the diplomatic arrangement between Princess Kira Talani of the Tani Confederation and Prefect Vallon of the Northern Provinces. Ambassador Talani announced, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. And to determine the appropriate response to Captain Derek Frost's involvement in this matter, General Harrington, a stern woman with steel-gray hair and a chest full of service medals, leaned forward. Captain Frost was assigned a simple escort mission. He will answer for his failure to maintain professional boundaries. With respect, General, Derek spoke up, his military training evident in his posture despite the hostile environment. No regulations were violated during this mission. The circumstances were extraordinary and unprecedented. Unprecedented indeed, Prefect Vallon interjected, his melodic Tani accent doing nothing to soften the edge in his voice. A neural empathic conception between species? One might question whether such a thing is even possible without assistance. The implication was clear, and Derek felt Kira tense beside him. I will submit to any verification process the Council deems necessary, she stated, addressing the entire chamber. The conception occurred through neural empathic bonding following exposure to Araxian bone cactus toxin. Captain Frost saved my life at great personal risk, and the bond formed naturally during my treatment. Ambassador Talani's expression remained impassive, but his luminescent markings betrayed his agitation, pulsing rapidly at his temples. Regardless of how this occurred, the political ramifications are severe. The alliance between our houses, Prefect Vallon, has been years in negotiation. An alliance now rendered void, Kira said firmly. By our own sacred laws of conception, a neural empathic bond takes precedence over any political arrangement. A murmur ran through the Tani delegation. One elderly Tani with elaborately patterned markings, covering most of his visible skin, rose to his feet. The princess speaks truth, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. As keeper of the sacred laws, I confirm that a life created through the rare blessing of neural empathic bonding is considered most precious among our kind. Such a bond cannot be severed without grave spiritual consequences. Prefect Vallon surged to his feet. This is absurd. A human cannot possibly form a true neural empathic bond with a Tani. The very suggestion is an insult to our biological superiority. Yet it has happened, Kira replied calmly, placing a hand on her abdomen where the luminescent glow pulsed in response to her touch. The child grows within me, half human, half Tani, the first of its kind. General Harrington exchanged a glance with Colonel Mercer, her second in command. The Coalition has no precedent for this situation, she said carefully. Captain Frost's actions during the emergency on Araxis were commendable according to his report. However, the outcome of those actions presents complex diplomatic challenges. The Tani Confederation has ever been protective of its genetic purity, Ambassador Talani noted, his gaze fixed on his daughter. No cross-species offspring has ever been acknowledged among our kind. Then perhaps it is time for change, Kira suggested, her voice strong despite the pressure bearing down upon her. The Coalition and Tani Confederation seek closer ties through diplomatic marriage. Why not through the miracle of new life instead? Derek stepped forward to stand beside Kira. His decision made, I formally request the right of valor, he announced. The chamber fell silent. The right of valor was an ancient Tani tradition, rarely invoked and almost never granted to outsiders. It was a trial of worth, a chance for one deemed unworthy to prove themselves through 3 challenges, one of mind, one of body, and one of spirit. Ambassador Talani's surprise was evident. You know of this tradition? I studied Tani culture extensively before this mission, Derek replied. As did Princess Kira regarding human customs. We both took our diplomatic responsibilities seriously. The keeper of sacred laws stepped into the center of the chamber, his aged eyes assessing Derek with newfound interest. The right of valor has not been granted to a non-Tani in 7 generations, he said. Yet our laws do not forbid it. If the father of a royal child wishes to claim his place through the ancient rite, it is his right to try. This is preposterous, Prefect Valen objected. A human cannot possibly. Are you afraid of the comparison, Prefect? Kira interrupted, a challenge in her voice. Captain Frost has already proven his courage by facing an Araxian sandstorm to save my life. What acts of valor mark your own history? A tense silence followed her words. Valen's luminescent markings flared with anger, but he said nothing more. Ambassador Talani conferred quietly with the other Tani officials before addressing the chamber once more. The Council will grant Captain Derek Frost the right of valor, he announced formally. The 3 trials will commence tomorrow at dawn. Should he succeed, his claim as father to Princess Kira's child will be recognized under Tani law. General Harrington rose to her feet. And what of coalition law, Ambassador? Captain Frost remains under our jurisdiction. A valid concern, Ambassador Talani conceded. I propose this. Should Captain Frost succeed in the trials, both our peoples will recognize the validity of the neural empathic bond and the legitimacy of the child. The coalition will restore Captain Frost's full military standing, and the Tani Confederation will welcome him as consort to Princess Kira. And if he fails? Colonel Mercer asked bluntly. Ambassador Talani's expression hardened. Then he returns to coalition space, stripped of rank for violating the sanctity of a diplomatic mission. Princess Kira will be cleansed of the neural empathic bond through ancient rituals. And the child. He paused, unable to meet his daughter's gaze. The child will not be acknowledged. No, Kira said, her voice ringing with authority. I refuse those terms. The bond cannot be severed without harming the child. Whatever the outcome of the trials, I will bear this child and raise it with honor. A commotion rippled through the Tani delegation at her defiance. Ambassador Talani's luminescent markings pulsed with barely controlled anger. You would defy your father, your people, and thousands of years of tradition, he demanded. I would honor the miracle that has been granted to us, Kira replied steadily. A bridge between our peoples, born of something more profound than political arrangement. For a long moment, father and daughter locked eyes in silent confrontation. Then, surprisingly, it was Ambassador Talani who looked away first. So be it, he said quietly. Captain Frost will face the trials. If he succeeds, both our peoples will recognize the union and the child. If he fails, he paused, clearly struggling with the decision. If he fails, Princess Kira may still bear the child, but both she and Captain Frost will be exiled from Tani society, and no formal recognition will be granted by either government. General Harrington conferred briefly with her advisors before nodding. The coalition accepts these terms, provided Captain Frost enters the trials of his own free will. All eyes turned to Derek. The weight of the moment pressed upon him. Not just his future, but Kira's and their unborn child's hung in the balance. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness. He barely knew this woman, despite the intense connection they had formed. The child was an accident, a biological anomaly caused by alien toxins and emergency medical procedures. Yet, when he looked at Kira, something deeper than reason responded. The neural empathic bond might have faded from its initial intensity, but the connection remained. A subtle awareness of her emotions, an inexplicable certainty that what had happened between them was meant to be. I accept the right of valor, Derek stated firmly, of my own free will. A formal declaration was drawn up and signed by all parties. As the council disbanded to prepare for the trials, Derek found himself escorted to private quarters within the diplomatic complex. Though the accommodations were luxurious, the armed guards stationed outside his door made it clear that he was as much prisoner as guest. As night fell over Centauri Prime, Derek sat alone, reviewing what little information he had been provided about the trials ahead. The specifics were deliberately vague. Each challenge would test a different aspect of his worthiness, but the exact nature of the tests would not be revealed until the moment of trial. A soft knock at his door roused him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he was surprised to find Colonel Mercer standing there, her expression unreadable. "May I come in, Captain?" she asked formally. Derek stepped aside to allow her entry, noting that the guards made no move to stop her. "Colonel," he acknowledged once the door had closed. "I didn't expect a visit from Coalition Command." Mercer surveyed the room before taking a seat, gesturing for Derek to do the same. "This is off the record, Frost," she said, her voice low. "I served with your father during the early Rielian conflicts. He was a good man, a good soldier." Derek nodded, surprised by the personal connection. "Thank you, Colonel." "What you're facing tomorrow," Mercer hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "No human has ever completed the Tani trials. The physical challenge alone has killed 3 diplomatic envoys in the past century. I'm aware of the risks." "Are you?" Mercer leaned forward, her expression deadly serious. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're throwing away your career and possibly your life for an alien princess you met 3 weeks ago and a child that shouldn't even be possible." Derek met her gaze steadily. "With respect, Colonel, the impossible seems to be happening regardless of our opinions on the matter." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed Mercer's face. "Your father had the same stubborn streak," she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "The general sent me to offer you an alternative. Renounce the right of valor. Return to Coalition space. We'll arrange for you to receive an honorable discharge, rather than a court-martial. A fresh start, away from all this." "And Kira, the child?" Mercer's expression softened slightly. "The princess has made her choice clear. She'll bear the child with or without Tani approval. The Coalition has no jurisdiction over her decisions." "So I'm meant to abandon them both?" Derek asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Like I supposedly abandoned my team on Caldor Prime?" The colonel's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I'm suggesting, and you know it. But there are other ways to support them without martyring yourself in some alien ritual." Derek was silent for a long moment, considering her words. The rational arguments were sound. He had no guarantee of success in the trials, and failure would bring exile for both him and Kira. Perhaps there was indeed a more pragmatic path forward. Then he remembered the feel of Kira in his arms as he carried her through the Araxian sandstorm. The mental connection that had formed between them, raw and intimate and unlike anything he had ever experienced. The wonder in her voice when she had first sensed the life growing within her. Some things transcended rational calculation. "Thank you for the offer, Colonel," he said finally, "but I've made my decision." Mercer studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly as she rose to leave. "For what it's worth, so am I." The door closed behind her, leaving Derek alone once more with his thoughts and the looming trials of the morning. Dawn on Centauri Prime brought a sky streaked with emerald and gold, the binary stars of the system creating a spectacle of light as they rose above the horizon. Derek was escorted to an ancient amphitheater on the outskirts of the diplomatic quarter, its stone walls predating the Coalition's presence on the planet by centuries. A considerable crowd had gathered to witness the trials, Tani officials in their ceremonial attire, Coalition representatives in formal uniforms, and local dignitaries eager to observe the unprecedented event. At the center of the amphitheater, stood a raised platform where the Keeper of Sacred Laws waited, flanked by Ambassador Talani and General Harrington. Derek spotted Kira among the tiny delegation, her luminescent markings visible, even from a distance. Though protocol surely dictated, she remained seated with her people. She rose as Derek entered and moved to meet him at the edge of the central arena. "You don't have to do this," she said without preamble, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "We could leave, find a place beyond both Tani and Coalition influence." Derek took her hands in his, feeling the now familiar current of emotion that passed between them at the contact. "And spend our lives looking over our shoulders? That's no way to raise a child." Kira's markings pulsed with concern. "The trials are designed to break those deemed unworthy. No outsider has ever completed all three." "Then I'll be the first," Derek replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. He released her hands gently. "I have to try, Kira. For all three of us." Before she could respond, a ceremonial horn sounded across the amphitheater. The Keeper of Sacred Laws raised his arms for silence. "Today, we witness the Rite of Valor, invoked by Captain Derek Frost of the United Coalition Forces," the ancient Tani announced, his voice carrying clearly despite his age. "3 trials he shall face, of mind, of body, and of spirit. Should he succeed in all 3, his claim as father to the child of Princess Kira Talani shall be recognized by both our peoples. Should he fail, exile awaits both him and the princess who carries his child." A murmur ran through the crowd, quickly silenced by another blast from the ceremonial horn. "The first trial begins now," the Keeper declared. "The trial of mind." At his signal, a circular section of the arena floor receded, revealing a complex mechanism beneath. As it rose to surface level, Derek recognized it as a 3-dimensional chess variant, popular among Tani strategists, but far more elaborate than any version he had seen before. Instead of pieces, holographic projections flickered into existence above the board, representing various military units from both Tani and Coalition forces. The trial of mind tests not merely intelligence, but strategic thinking, adaptability, and the wisdom to know when victory requires sacrifice. The Keeper explained. "Captain Frost will command the Coalition forces. Prefect Valen will command the Tani defenses." Derek's heart sank. Valen was renowned as a master strategist, and the game clearly favored Tani tactical doctrine. This was no fair contest, but a nearly impossible challenge designed to ensure his failure. As he took his position at one side of the board, Valen approached from the opposite direction, a smug confidence in his bearing. "A fitting first defeat," the prefect remarked quietly as they faced each other across the holographic battlefield. "Your kind has always lacked the patience for true strategy." Derek made no reply, focusing instead on the array of units at his disposal. The rules were standard, but the battlefield itself was unlike anything he had trained for. A complex, multi-level environment with environmental hazards and hidden advantages that would take time to fully comprehend. Time he didn't have. "Begin," the Keeper commanded. Valen moved immediately, deploying his forces in a classic Tani defensive formation, a deceptively vulnerable-looking arrangement that could rapidly transform into an aggressive assault once the opponent committed their main force. Derek studied the board carefully, recognizing the trap. Rather than engaging directly, he split his forces into smaller, more mobile units, deploying them to secure key terrain features rather than seeking direct confrontation. Valen's expression tightened slightly at the unexpected approach. The traditional coalition response would have been to mass forces for a decisive engagement, a strategy that would have played directly into Tani's strengths. For the next hour, the two commanders maneuvered their forces across the holographic terrain, each seeking advantage without committing to a decisive battle. The crowd watched in growing appreciation as Derek consistently avoided Valen's carefully laid traps while gradually securing a territorial advantage. You delay the inevitable, Valen said as Derek once again withdrew a force that had been lured toward an ambush. In the end, you must either attack or concede. Perhaps, Derek agreed, studying the board intently. Or perhaps victory doesn't always look the way we expect it to. With that cryptic remark, he executed a series of moves that seemed to abandon his careful strategy, suddenly pushing multiple forces toward Valen's central position. The prefect's expression shifted from confusion to triumphant certainty as he deployed his reserves to spring the trap he had been patiently developing throughout the game. Only when it was too late did Valen realize the truth. Derek's apparent recklessness had been calculated. Sacrificing expendable units to draw out Valen's full strength, while a small, specialized force penetrated deep into the Tani rear areas. Not to attack Valen's command center as Tani doctrine would expect, but to secure the holographic equivalent of civilian populations. Hostage doctrine, Valen spat, recognizing the distinctly human strategy. Dishonorable. Effective, Derek countered. Your forces are positioned to destroy mine. Yes, but in doing so, you would sacrifice your own civilians. The victory condition isn't the destruction of the enemy force. It's the security of your people. The Keeper of Sacred Laws approached the board, studying the positions carefully. After a long moment, he nodded. Captain Frost has achieved strategic victory, he announced. The first trial is complete. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Derek caught sight of Kira, her expression a mixture of relief and pride. One trial down, 2 to go. The second trial will commence after a brief respite, the Keeper declared. Prepare yourself, Captain, for the trial of body. As the holographic battlefield receded into the floor, Derek was escorted to a preparation chamber at the edge of the amphitheater. A coalition medical officer briefly examined him, offering water and nutrient supplements. The physical trial is typically brutal, the officer warned quietly. Pace yourself. Derek nodded, using the brief respite to center his thoughts and regulate his breathing. Techniques he had learned during Special Forces training. He couldn't help wondering what form the trial of body would take. Combat, perhaps. Endurance. The Tani were known for their agility rather than brute strength, which might give him an advantage in certain types of physical contests. All too soon. The ceremonial horn sounded again, calling him back to the central arena. The space had been transformed during his absence. A series of obstacles now filled the circular space. Climbing walls, narrow balance beams suspended over shallow pits, rope traverses, and other challenges that reminded Derek of military training courses. But interspersed among them were uniquely alien elements, shimmering energy fields of unknown purpose, strange crystalline formations that seemed to shift position subtly, and what appeared to be holographic hazards. The Keeper of Sacred Laws raised his arms for silence once more. The trial of body tests not merely strength or speed, but endurance, adaptability, and the physical commitment to overcome impossible odds. He intoned solemnly. Captain Frost must complete the course within the time limit, while contending with a worthy opponent. At these words, a murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Derek scanned the arena, wondering who his opponent would be. Prefect Valen again, some Tani champion specially selected for the task. The answer emerged from the opposite side of the arena, and Derek felt his blood run cold. Not a Tani at all, but a Krell, a reptilian mercenary species known throughout the galaxy for their physical prowess and notorious for their work as bounty hunters and assassins. This particular specimen stood nearly 2 meters tall, its scaled skin a mottled gray-green, powerful muscles rippling beneath as it performed a series of warm-up exercises that showcased its impressive agility despite its size. This is meant to be a fair trial, Colonel Mercer objected loudly from the Coalition section. A Krell has natural advantages in this type of course. The Keeper acknowledged the objection with a slight nod. The trial of body is not meant to be fair, Colonel, It is meant to be formidable. However, to address your concern, Captain Frost will be granted a 30-second head start. 30 seconds. Against a Krell's superior climbing ability, natural armor, and enhanced vision. Derek suppressed a grimace. The head start was almost insulting in its inadequacy. As he took his position at the starting line, Derek felt a familiar presence in his mind. Kira. Reaching out through their fading neural empathic bond. No words, just emotions, confidence, concern, and something deeper that gave him strength. "Begin," the keeper commanded. Derek exploded into motion, sprinting toward the first obstacle, a sheer wall nearly 4 meters high. His military training took over, body moving with practiced efficiency as he leapt, caught the top edge, and pulled himself up and over in one fluid motion. No time to look back. The Krell would be released in seconds. The next challenge was a series of platforms, separated by increasing distances, suspended over shallow pits, filled with some kind of luminescent liquid. Derek jumped from one to the next, maintaining his momentum, calculating each leap with precision. Behind him, the crowd roared as the Krell was released, its powerful legs propelling it forward with frightening speed. By the time Derek reached the energy field section, he could hear the creature's heavy breathing close behind. The energy fields pulsed with varying colors, creating barriers that appeared and disappeared in rhythmic patterns. Derek studied them for a precious second, identifying the sequence, then dove through the first opening the moment it appeared. Roll, sprint, dive, weave. He navigated the section with desperate focus, aware that the Krell was gaining with each moment. The crystalline formation presented a new challenge. As Derek approached, the crystals rearranged themselves, forming a maze that shifted continuously. No pattern was discernible. He would have to rely on instinct and reaction. "Left!" a voice called from the crowd. Kira, breaking protocol to assist him. "Right at the blue crystal!" The Krell was less than 10 meters behind now, its clawed hands reaching for handholds in the crystal maze with natural expertise. Derek followed Kira's guidance, trusting her tawny perception to see patterns he couldn't discern. Left, right, straight ahead. Duck beneath a low-hanging formation. The path opened before him, allowing him to maintain his dwindling lead. The final section was a rope traverse over a pit that appeared to have no bottom, just an endless darkness that somehow felt more threatening than any physical hazard. The rope was thin, clearly designed to support a Tani's lighter frame, rather than a human's more substantial weight. No time for hesitation. The Krell was practically at his heels. Derek grabbed the rope and swung out over the void, using his momentum to carry him forward. Hand over hand, he moved across the expanse, the rope creaking ominously beneath his weight. Halfway across, he heard a sound that turned his blood to ice. The Krell had reached the rope behind him and was now on the same traverse, its greater weight causing the entire structure to sway violently. Derek increased his pace, ignoring the burning in his shoulders and arms. The finish line was tantalizingly close, a simple platform on the other side of the pit. But the Krell was faster on the rope than he had anticipated, its clawed feet providing additional purchase that Derek lacked. In a desperate gamble, Derek began swinging the rope, building momentum with each arc. The Krell, unprepared for the sudden movement, clung tighter to maintain its position. When the swing reached its apex, Derek released his grip, launching himself toward the platform. For one heart-stopping moment, he hung in the air, uncertain if his leap would carry him far enough. Then his hands slammed into the edge of the platform, his body slamming painfully against its side. With a final surge of strength, he pulled himself up and rolled onto the surface just as the Krell landed beside him with a heavy thud. A hush fell over the amphitheater as officials consulted their timing devices. The Krell glared at Derek with reptilian contempt, its scaled chest heaving from the exertion. Finally, the keeper approached the platform. "Captain Derek Frost has completed the course with a lead of 1.7 seconds, he announced, The second trial is complete. The crowd erupted, some in celebration, others in disbelief. Derek remained on his knees, struggling to regain his breath. His entire body screamed with fatigue, and he knew he had pushed himself to the absolute limit of human capability. A medical team approached to assess his condition, but Derek waved them away. There was one more trial to face, and he would need every ounce of strength he had left. The final trial will commence at sunset, the keeper declared. The trial of spirit awaits. This time, Derek was escorted to a private chamber where medical attention was non-negotiable. As a coalition physician treated his abrasions and administered electrolyte supplements, Derek found his thoughts turning to the final challenge ahead. The trial of mind had tested his strategic thinking. The trial of body had pushed his physical limits. What would the trial of spirit entail? The Tani were known to be deeply spiritual beings. Their luminescent markings supposedly connected to what they called the inner light, something between a soul and a collective consciousness. How could a human possibly face such a trial? The door to his chamber opened, and to his surprise, Kira entered. Her father followed close behind, his expression grave. 10 minutes, Ambassador Talani said curtly. No more. He stationed himself by the door, clearly unwilling to leave them truly alone. Kira moved to Derek's side, taking his hand in hers. The neural empathic connection flared briefly at the contact. Weaker than before, but still present. You're doing remarkably well, she said softly. No one expected you to pass even the first trial. I think that was rather the point, Derek replied with a tired smile. What can you tell me about the trial of spirit? Kira's luminescent markings pulsed with concern. It's different for everyone. The trial seeks to confront you with your deepest fears, your greatest regrets, to test whether your spirit is strong enough to face truth without breaking. How? Some kind of hallucinogen? She shook her head. Nothing so crude. The trial takes place in the Temple of Reflection. The crystals there are special. They amplify telepathic abilities and reflect what lies within your own mind. Derek frowned. I'm not telepathic. Everyone has some latent ability, Kira explained. And our bond may have awakened something in you that wasn't there before. Her hand moved to her abdomen, where the glow of her markings concentrated. The child connects us still. Ambassador Talani cleared his throat pointedly. Time is short, daughter. Kira ignored him, leaning closer to Derek. Whatever you see in there, remember that it comes from within you. The crystals cannot create, only reflect and amplify. Find your truth, and you will find your way. My truth, Derek repeated, not entirely understanding. The reason you fight, Kira whispered. Not for duty or honor or even for me, but for what you truly believe in your deepest self. Before Derek could ask her to explain further, Ambassador Talani stepped forward. It is time, Princess. The preparations for the final trial are complete. Kira squeezed Derek's hand one last time, sending a surge of emotion through their fading bond. Strength, hope, and something deeper that he couldn't quite name. I'll be waiting, she promised, as she reluctantly released his hand and followed her father from the chamber. Sunset on Centauri Prime transformed the landscape into a canvas of deep purples and fiery oranges. Derek was escorted not to the amphitheater this time, but to an ancient structure set apart from the diplomatic quarter, a temple constructed of the same crystalline material that the Tani incorporated into their architecture, but far older than any of the surrounding buildings. The Temple of Reflection had no windows, its interior illuminated solely by the soft glow emanating from the crystal walls themselves. As Derek was led through winding corridors by silent Tani attendants, he noticed how the light seemed to respond to his presence, brightening and dimming in rhythm with his breathing. The central chamber was a perfect circle, its ceiling soaring to a point high above. The walls were lined with crystal formations of varying sizes, each catching and refracting light in hypnotic patterns. In the center of the room stood a single crystalline pedestal, empty, but radiating a subtle energy that Derek could feel, even from the entrance. The attendants withdrew, leaving Derek alone with the Keeper of Sacred Laws, who had been waiting in the chamber. "The trial of spirit is the most personal of the three," the ancient Tani explained, his luminescent markings glowing softly in the dim light. "There are no opponents here but yourself, no obstacles but those you carry within." He gestured to the pedestal. "Place your hands upon the reflection crystal. It will show you what you need to see, not what you wish to see. How you respond will determine whether you are worthy in spirit as well as mind and body." Derek approached the pedestal cautiously. "What exactly will happen?" The Keeper's expression remained impassive. "That depends entirely on you, Captain Frost. The crystal reflects what lies within. For some, it reveals forgotten memories. For others, abandoned dreams. For many, their deepest fears and regrets." He paused, studying Derek with ancient eyes. "Are you prepared to face whatever truths you have buried within yourself?" Derek thought of Kira's words, "Find your truth, and you will find your way." Whatever that meant, he would soon discover it. "I'm ready," he said, placing his hands on the crystal. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber around him dissolved, replaced by a kaleidoscope of images and sensations that assaulted his senses from all directions. Fragments of memory, shards of emotion, pieces of dreams both forgotten and unrealized, all swirling around him in a chaotic maelstrom. Then, abruptly, everything stabilized. Derek found himself standing on Kaldor Prime, the red soil beneath his boots, the acrid smell of plasma weapons thick in the air. His squad moved around him, Johnson checking the perimeter, Ramirez configuring the communications array, Rodriguez, cleaning his weapon with practiced efficiency. "All clear, Captain," Williams reported, her young face unmarked by the scars she would never live to receive. "No sign of Rielian activity in this sector." Derek's heart constricted painfully. This was the last peaceful moment before the ambush, before everything went wrong. He wanted to warn them, to change the course of events, but his body moved according to memory rather than current will. "Maintain vigilance," he heard himself say. "Rielian forces have been spotted within 20 clicks. We complete the objective and extract immediately." The objective, a Rielian communication hub, believed to contain valuable intelligence on enemy fleet movements. The mission that had cost 8 lives and left Derek the sole survivor. The scene shifted, accelerating through the approach to the facility, the initial breach, the discovery that the intelligence was false, a trap designed to lure coalition special forces into the open. The Rielian ambush, perfectly executed. The desperate firefight as Derek ordered a retreat that came too late. He relived each moment in excruciating detail, each decision, each order given, each life lost under his command. When Ramirez fell, her chest torn open by plasma fire. When Johnson was caught in the blast radius of a thermal detonator. When Williams and Rodriguez made their final stand to cover the team's retreat. Derek watched himself being captured. The sole survivor, dragged before the Rielian commander. The torture that followed, physical pain beyond imagination, as they attempted to extract coalition security codes from him. His refusal to break, even as they brought in his captured team members one by one. Williams, Ramirez, Johnson, Rodriguez, each executed before his eyes when he refused to betray his oath. The memory was too much to bear. Derek fell to his knees within the vision, overwhelmed by grief and guilt that had never truly healed. "You believe you failed them," a voice observed, not from within the memory, but somehow overlaid upon it. The Keeper of Sacred Laws, his presence a strange intrusion in the recreated scene. "I did fail them," Derek replied, his voice raw with emotion. "They died because of my decisions." "Did they?" The Keeper circled him, observing the frozen tableau of horror that surrounded them. Or did they die because of Rielian treachery, because of a war not of your making, because of duty to a cause they all willingly served? I was their commander, Derek insisted. The responsibility was mine. Responsibility, yes, the keeper agreed. But not guilt, not shame. Those you have added yourself, a burden you chose to carry. The scene around them shifted again. Derek now stood before the military tribunal, listening as his commanding officer offered him the devil's bargain: accept a demotion and the official lie that he had abandoned his post, or face a court-martial for insubordination when he challenged the narrative. You chose shame over truth, the keeper observed. Why? Derek watched his younger self accept the terms, his expression carefully blank as the verdict was read. Because the truth wouldn't bring them back, he answered quietly. And a court-martial would only create a public spectacle that would dishonor their sacrifice. A noble rationalization, the keeper noted, but incomplete. Search deeper. Derek closed his eyes, forcing himself to examine the moment of decision with brutal honesty. What had truly motivated his choice? I was tired, he admitted finally. Tired of fighting, not just the Rielians, but the bureaucracy, the politics, the games played with soldiers' lives. I wanted it to end. The demotion meant a transfer out of special forces, away from the front lines, a chance to disappear. To punish yourself, the keeper corrected gently. To accept shame as penance for survival. The truth of the words struck Derek like a physical blow. He had carried the guilt of surviving when his team died, and the shame of the false narrative had been a form of self-punishment, a daily reminder that he had lived when better soldiers had died. What does this have to do with proving my worthiness to be with Kira? Derek asked, struggling to understand the purpose of reliving his darkest memories. The keeper gestured, and the scene changed again. Now they stood aboard the Hermes, watching as Derek carried an unconscious Kira through the sandstorm, his body straining with effort, but his determination unwavering. You risked your life to save hers, the keeper observed. Why? It was my duty, Derek replied automatically. Was it? The keeper's luminescent markings pulsed skeptically. Your mission parameters required you to keep her alive. Yes. But to risk your own life in a sandstorm when the ship's medical AI could have sustained her? To push beyond human endurance to reach the trading post? That went far beyond duty. Captain Frost. Derek watched himself collapse beside Kira's bed in the medical facility, exhausted beyond measure, but refusing to leave her side. I couldn't lose another person under my protection, he said quietly. And yet, there is more, the keeper pressed. Search deeper. The scene shifted again, this time to the moment when Derek and Kira's minds had connected, when the neural empathic bond had formed between them. Derek saw the moment from outside himself, witnessed the raw emotion that had passed between them, the complete vulnerability as each saw into the other's soul. I saw her, Derek said simply. Not the princess, not the diplomatic package. Her. And she saw me, not the failure, not the disgraced officer, me. And in that seeing, the keeper prompted, I found acceptance, Derek realized. For the first time since Kaldor Prime, I was truly seen by another person. All my flaws, all my regrets, all my failures, and not judged for them. That is part of your truth, the keeper acknowledged. But still not all of it. What else did you find in that moment of connection? Derek struggled to articulate the complex emotions that had flowed between them. Hope, he said finally. Hope that there could be something more than duty and regret. That connection was possible again. That I could be more than the sum of my failures. And what of Princess Kira? What did you see in her? Derek's expression softened as he recalled the glimpses he had received of Kira's inner self. Her strength, her determination, her rebellion against constraints, her loneliness despite constant company. A kindred spirit, he answered. Someone else trapped by expectations and duties they never chose. Someone fighting to find their own path without betraying what they believe in. The keeper nodded, satisfied. Now we approach your truth, Captain Frost. Not duty, not honor, not even love, though that may come in time. Your truth is redemption, not from failure, but from the shame you never deserved to carry. He gestured to the surrounding visions. Your team died with honor, protecting each other and their mission to the last. They would not want their captain to live in shame. The images around them began to shift more rapidly. Derek carrying Kira through the storm, facing the Krell in physical combat, outmaneuvering Prefect Valen in strategic battle. Each moment of strength and courage. Each decision made not from duty, but from something deeper. The child you have created together is a beginning, not an obligation. The keeper continued. A chance to build something new, unburdened by the politics of two peoples, or the weight of the past. That is what you fight for. Not to atone, but to begin again. To create rather than destroy. To build a future worthy of those who sacrificed to give you this chance. The truth of the words resonated through Derek's entire being. The visions around them stilled, focusing on a single image. Kira in the council chamber, her hand protectively over her abdomen, defying her father and her people for the sake of the child they had created together. Your truth and hers are intertwined, the keeper observed, both seeking freedom from imposed constraints, both willing to sacrifice status for authenticity, both brave enough to chart an unknown course, rather than follow a predetermined path. The visions began to fade, the crystal chamber gradually resolving around them once more. Derek found himself still standing before the pedestal, his hands resting on the now softly glowing crystal. The keeper stood across from him, luminescent markings pulsing with approval. The trial of spirit is complete, the ancient Tani announced. You have faced your deepest truths without flinching. You have recognized the weight you carry and the reason you fight. In spirit, as in mind and body, you have proven yourself worthy. Derek slowly removed his hands from the crystal, feeling strangely lighter than he had in years. The guilt and shame of Kaldor Prime would never fully disappear, but they no longer defined him. He had found a new purpose, not atonement for the past, but creation of a future. What happens now? He asked, his voice steady despite the emotional journey he had just experienced. The keeper's luminescent markings pulsed with what might have been approval. Now, Captain Frost, you take your place as the first human to complete the rite of valor. You claim your child and your future, recognized by both our peoples. As they left the Temple of Reflection, Derek emerged into the cool night air of Centauri Prime to find a gathered crowd waiting in expectant silence. At the forefront stood Kira, her luminescent markings glowing brilliantly in the darkness, her hands clasped before her in anxious anticipation. Beside her, Ambassador Talani and General Harrington waited with the rest of the Tani Council and coalition representatives. Even Prefect Valen was present, his expression carefully neutral. The keeper raised his arms, his voice carrying across the assembled dignitaries. The trials are complete. Captain Derek Frost has proven himself worthy in mind, body, and spirit. The rite of valor is satisfied. A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, respect, and in some quarters, clear disappointment. Ambassador Talani's expression remained impassive, but General Harrington nodded with what appeared to be grudging approval. By the ancient laws of the Tani Confederation and the modern accords of the United Coalition, the keeper continued formally. I declare the neural empathic bond between Captain Derek Frost and Princess Kira Talani to be valid and sacred. Their child shall be recognized as legitimate by both peoples, a living bridge between two worlds. Derek moved forward to stand beside Kira, taking her hand in his. The neural empathic connection flared briefly at the contact, weaker than before, but somehow clearer, more focused. You did it, she whispered, her violet eyes shining with emotion. "All 3 trials." "For us," Derek replied simply. "For our future." Ambassador Talani approached them, his regal bearing unchanged, but something new in his eyes as he regarded his daughter and the human who had defied all expectations. "The Council accepts the outcome of the trials," he stated formally. "Captain Frost has earned the right to stand as father to my grandchild." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "Though I maintain reservations about this unprecedented situation." "Your reservations are noted, Father," Kira replied with equal formality. "But the ancient laws are clear. The neural empathic bond takes precedence over political arrangements." "Indeed." The ambassador's gaze shifted to Derek. "The coalition has agreed to restore your military rank and clear your record of the misrepresentations regarding Kaldor Prime. The truth of that mission will be acknowledged officially." Derek stared at him in surprise. "How?" "I may have had some influence in the matter," General Harrington interjected, joining their conversation. "The coalition recognizes the diplomatic value of this union. A decorated hero makes a more appropriate consort for a Tani princess than a disgraced officer." There was more to it than that, Derek suspected, but he simply nodded his thanks. The official recognition of what truly happened on Kaldor Prime meant his team's sacrifice would finally be acknowledged properly, a weight lifted that he hadn't realized he was still carrying. "There are many details to be arranged," Ambassador Talani continued briskly. "Living arrangements, diplomatic status, the child's education and cultural heritage, all must be negotiated carefully." "With respect, Ambassador," Derek said, finding his voice. "Those are decisions for Kira and me to make together." The ambassador's luminescent markings pulsed with surprise at the human's boldness. "You presume much, Captain Frost." "I presume only what I have earned through the right of valor," Derek replied steadily. "The right to stand beside your daughter as an equal, not as a subordinate." For a tense moment, the 2 men locked eyes in silent confrontation. Then, surprisingly, it was Ambassador Talani who inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Perhaps you are worthy after all, human," he said quietly. "My daughter has always had excellent judgment in matters of importance." With that cryptic remark, he turned and rejoined the Tani delegation. As the formal proceedings concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Derek and Kira found themselves granted a moment of relative privacy. The neural empathic bond between them had stabilized, no longer the overwhelming connection of their first mind link, but a comfortable awareness, a subtle sense of each other's emotions and thoughts. "What happens now?" Derek asked, echoing his earlier question to the keeper. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed with gentle amusement. "Now, Captain Derek Frost, we build something new." Her hand moved to her abdomen, where the glow of new life pulsed in rhythm with her own markings. Together, Derek placed his hand over hers, feeling the faint, energetic resonance of their child, half human, half Tani, a bridge between worlds that no diplomatic arrangement could have created. "Together," he agreed, and for the first time since Kaldor Prime, felt the weight of the past lift completely from his shoulders. 3 months later, on a warm evening on Araxis, Kira gave birth to a daughter with violet eyes and luminescent markings that pulsed with a golden light, unlike any seen before among the Tani. They named her Nova, a new star in a previously uncharted sky. The medical facility at Trading Post Epsilon had been significantly upgraded for the occasion, with both Tani and coalition medical experts in attendance. Dr. Varon personally oversaw the delivery, his professional demeanor briefly cracking into wonder when the child emerged with perfectly formed features that harmoniously blended both species' characteristics. "A medical miracle," he declared, placing the newborn in Kira's arms. "The first of her kind, but perhaps not the last." Derek stood beside them, overwhelmed by emotions he had never expected to experience. Through their neural empathic bond, he could feel Kira's exhaustion joy, and fierce protectiveness. And beyond that, a faint but distinct third presence. Their daughter's consciousness already reaching out to connect with her parents. "She's beautiful," he said simply, words inadequate to express the complexity of what he felt. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed with agreement as she gazed down at their child. And entirely herself, neither fully human nor fully Tani, but something new entirely. "Something better," Derek suggested, gently touching Nova's tiny hand. The infant's fingers curled reflexively around his, and through the contact, he felt her recognition, an instinctive awareness of her father's presence. News of Nova's birth spread quickly through both Tani and Coalition worlds. For many, she represented a physical manifestation of the peace that had been negotiated between their peoples, living proof that cooperation and understanding were possible, even between species that had once regarded each other with suspicion and prejudice. Others, of course, viewed the child with alarm or disdain, a dilution of Tani purity, an unpredictable genetic anomaly, a potential diplomatic complication. But such voices were increasingly marginalized as both governments officially celebrated the birth as a symbol of their new alliance. Ambassador Talani arrived on Araxis a week after his granddaughter's birth, his formal diplomatic manner softening visibly when Nova was placed in his arms. The infant's golden markings seemed to pulse in response to his own blue patterns, creating an interplay of light that captivated the usually stoic ambassador. "She has the royal luminescence," he observed, genuine wonder in his voice. "Stronger than any I have seen in generations. Dr. Varen believes it may be the result of her mixed heritage," Kira explained. "The human capacity for emotional depth, combined with Tani telepathic abilities." The ambassador studied his granddaughter's face thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is wisdom in new combinations that we had not considered." He glanced at Derek, who stood nearby. "Your trials proved more than your personal worth, Captain Frost. They demonstrated that our peoples have more in common than we have acknowledged." It was as close to an apology as the proud Tani would ever offer, and Derek accepted it with a respectful nod. Their relationship would never be warm, but a mutual respect had developed that was sufficient foundation for the future. As Nova grew and developed in the weeks that followed, it became clear that she possessed unique abilities that neither human nor Tani children typically exhibited. Her telepathic capabilities manifested far earlier than normal for Tani infants, allowing her to communicate emotionally with both parents even before she could form words. Her luminescent markings responded not only to her own emotions, but to those around her, creating complex patterns of light that seemed to reflect the emotional atmosphere of her environment. Derek and Kira had chosen to make their home on Araxis, the planet where their unlikely bond had first formed. The trading post had grown into a thriving settlement as increased diplomatic activity between the Coalition and Tani Confederation created new opportunities for commerce and cultural exchange. Their residence, situated on the outskirts with a view of the desert that had nearly claimed their lives, served as both home and unofficial diplomatic outpost. One evening, as the twin suns of Araxis set in a spectacular display of color, Derek found Kira on the terrace, holding Nova as the infant watched the sunset with fascination, her golden markings pulsing in rhythm with the changing light. "She loves the desert," Kira observed as Derek joined them. "Despite everything, I think she senses this is where she truly began." Derek slipped an arm around Kira's waist, feeling the familiar warmth of their connection strengthen with the contact. "Not where I would have chosen to break down," he admitted with a smile. "But I can't regret how things turned out." Kira leaned against him, her luminescent markings harmonizing with Nova's in a dance of blue and gold light. "She refused the human's advice," she said thoughtfully. "So now she's paying the painful price." Derek raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Something Dr. Varen said when I visited him today, Kira explained, amusement in her voice. He was referring to me, how I refused your advice about protective gear on Araxis. And now, I'm paying the price by being bonded to a stubborn human and raising a half-human child. A painful price indeed, Derek agreed with mock solemnity. Being stuck with us must be terrible. Kira's luminescent markings pulsed with laughter. The most wonderful pain imaginable. She turned to face him fully, violet eyes reflecting the sunset. I would refuse your advice 1,000 times over if it led us here again. As Nova's golden markings brightened in response to her parents' emotions, Derek thought of the long, improbable journey that had brought them to this moment. From reluctant captain and haughty princess to partners creating a life and future neither of them could have imagined. A journey that began with a refusal, a sandstorm, and a pain that had transformed into something beautiful. So would I, he said simply, and pulled his family closer as the Araxian night embraced them in stars.